The coffee machine hissed behind me, drowning out the soft music playing in the cafe. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear as I balanced the tray of drinks, my fingers cramping from the weight. 6 hours into my double shift, and my feet were already screaming in protest inside my worn-out sneakers. "Table 7, Ellie," Marco called from behind the counter. I nodded, forcing a smile despite the exhaustion that hung on me like a second skin. The cafe was unusually busy for a Tuesday afternoon, the air thick with the scent of espresso and vanilla. My uniform clung uncomfortably to my back, damp with sweat from rushing between tables. "Here you go," I said, placing the last cappuccino on the table, careful not to spill it. The businessman barely looked up from his phone, just a grunt of acknowledgement. Invisible, as always. That's when the atmosphere shifted. The door opened, letting in a gust of cool autumn air that crawled across my skin. Conversations dimmed. The cafe seemed to hold its breath. I turned, curious about the sudden change. 2 men entered first, tall, broad-shouldered figures in tailored suits, their eyes scanning the room with calculated precision. They moved with purpose, taking positions near the entrance. Security. Not the mall cop kind, but the dangerous kind that made your instincts scream threat. And then he walked in. Even if he hadn't been flanked by bodyguards, I would have noticed him. He commanded attention without asking for it, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Dark hair, meticulously styled, framed a face that belonged on a movie screen. All sharp angles and perfect symmetry. But it was his eyes that caught me, dark, watchful, eerily calm. The eyes of someone accustomed to being obeyed. I quickly looked away, feeling inexplicably exposed, as if those eyes could see every struggle, every worry, every secret I'd ever kept. My hands trembled slightly as I collected empty cups from a nearby table. "Ellie?" Marco hissed, appearing beside me so suddenly I nearly dropped a saucer. "That's Enzo Corelli." The name meant nothing to me, and my blank expression must have shown it. "Jesus, you don't know. The Corelli family owns half the city," he whispered, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "They don't exactly advertise in the yellow pages, if you get what I mean." A chill ran down my spine. I'd heard rumors, of course. Everyone in the city had. Businesses that mysteriously changed hands overnight. Politicians who suddenly changed their votes on key issues. The whispers of what happened to people who crossed certain lines. "What's he doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Marco shrugged. "He comes in occasionally. Always sits at the corner table by the window. Always orders the same thing." He pressed a clean rag into my hand. "And you're going to take his order today." "What? No, why me?" "Because Sophia called in sick, and you're the only other one who knows how to make his special drink correctly." My stomach nodded. "I don't even know what he orders." "Double espresso with a splash of almond milk, no sugar, served with sparkling water on the side. The espresso has to be the Sicilian blend, not the house blend." Marco's expression softened slightly. "Look, just be polite. Don't make eye contact for too long and you'll be fine." Before I could protest further, Marco disappeared back behind the counter. I took a deep breath, straightened my apron, and made my way toward the corner table, where Enzo Corelli was now seated, one bodyguard at a respectful distance, the other outside by a sleek black car with tinted windows. Up close, his presence was even more intimidating. He sat with his back to the wall, a position that gave him a clear view of the entire cafe. A silver watch glinted on his wrist as he scrolled through something on his phone, his movements deliberate and controlled. I cleared my throat softly. "Good afternoon. What can I get for you today?" He looked up slowly, those dark eyes assessing me in a single, unhurried glance that somehow felt more intimate than a touch. He didn't smile, didn't offer the customary pleasantries that most customers did. "You're new," he said, his voice low and smooth, with just the faintest trace of an Italian accent. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Just covering for Sophia today." Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps. "I see. Double espresso with almond milk. Sicilian blend. Sparkling water on the side. Yes, sir. Right away." I turned to leave, relieved the interaction was over, when his voice stopped me. "What's your name?" I hesitated. unsure why he would ask, unsure if I should answer, but refusing felt dangerous in a way I couldn't articulate. "Eleanor," I said. "Most people call me Ellie." He nodded once, a gesture of dismissal. As I walked away, I could feel his gaze on my back, tracking my movement across the room. My skin prickled with awareness, like prey sensing a predator. Back behind the counter, my hands shook as I prepared his order. I was being ridiculous, I told myself. He was just a customer. A powerful, dangerous customer, perhaps, but still just a man ordering coffee. When I returned with his drink, he was speaking quietly into his phone in Italian, his tone clipped and authoritative. He ended the call as I approached, slipping the phone into his pocket with practiced ease. I placed the espresso and water before him, careful not to let our fingers brush. "Will there be anything else?" He studied the drink, then looked up at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I had the unsettling feeling he was reading me like a book, noting every detail, cataloging every flaw. "That will be all," he finally said, dismissing me with another slight nod. I retreated, grateful to return to my other tables, to the normal rhythm of the cafe. But throughout the next hour, I found myself stealing glances at his corner. He sat alone, occasionally making brief calls, mostly observing the room with quiet intensity. Once, I caught him watching me, his expression unreadable. I quickly looked away, heat rising to my cheeks for reasons I didn't understand. When he finally stood to leave, he placed a $100 bill under his empty cup, an absurd tip for a $5 drink. As he walked past me toward the door, he paused momentarily. "Thank you, Eleanor," he said, my name sounding different in his mouth, more formal, almost elegant. And then he was gone, his security falling into step around him, the cafe exhaling collectively as the door closed behind them. "Holy shit," Marco whispered, appearing at my elbow. "He never talks to the servers, never." I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant even as my heart raced. "He just asked my name. It's not a big deal." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Something about the encounter felt significant, like the first domino in a long, complex sequence I couldn't yet see. 3 days later, I was closing the cafe alone. Marco had left early for a family emergency, leaving me to finish the last hour of the shift and lock up. The evening crowd had dwindled to just a few students hunched over laptops, nursing cold coffees to justify their continued occupation of the tables. Outside, rain pattered against the windows, blurring the streetlights into hazy halos. I wiped down the counter for the 3rd time, watching the clock, counting the minutes until I could head home to my tiny apartment, to a hot shower, and the blessed relief of taking off these shoes. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up, ready to inform the newcomer that we'd be closing in 15 minutes. The words died in my throat. Enzo Corelli stood in the doorway, raindrops glistening on the shoulders of his black overcoat. This time, only one security detail accompanied him, staying by the door as Enzo approached the counter. The few remaining customers glanced up, sensing the shift in atmosphere, before quickly returning to their screens. "Good evening, Eleanor," he said, as if this was a perfectly normal occurrence, as if powerful men like him regularly visited small cafes minutes before closing time. "Mr. Corelli," I responded, surprised I remembered to use his name. "What can I get you?" He glanced around the nearly empty cafe. "You're closing soon." "In 15 minutes, yes, but I can still make you something if you'd like." He considered this, then shook his head. "I actually came to return something." From his pocket, he produced a small silver bracelet, a delicate chain with a tiny crescent moon charm. My bracelet, the one my grandmother had given me before she died, the one I'd been wearing every day for the past 5 years. I gasped softly, my hand automatically going to my wrist where it should have been. I hadn't even noticed it was missing. "It must have fallen off when you served my coffee the other day," he explained, holding it out to me. "One of my men found it near my table after we left." I reached for it, stunned by the gesture. Our fingers brushed as he dropped the bracelet into my palm, his skin warm against mine. That brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through me, like static electricity, but more intense. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved. This means a lot to me. It was my grandmother's. Something softened almost imperceptibly in his expression. Family heirlooms should be treasured. I nodded, slipping the bracelet back onto my wrist, fastening the clasp with clumsy fingers. When I looked up again, he was watching me with that same inscrutable intensity. I should let you finish closing, he said after a moment. Thank you again for bringing this back. You didn't have to. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Perhaps I wanted an excuse to come back. Before I could process what that meant, he was already turning away. At the door, he paused, looking back over his shoulder. Be careful walking home in this rain, Eleanor. The streets can be dangerous at night. And then he was gone again, disappearing into the rainy darkness with his shadow of a security guard. I stood frozen behind the counter, the bracelet suddenly heavy on my wrist, his words echoing in my mind. How did he know I walked home? Had he been watching me? The thought should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a confusing mixture of alarm and something else, something I wasn't ready to name. The next morning, I was running late. I'd overslept after a night of restless dreams filled with dark eyes and rain-slicked streets. I rushed through my tiny apartment, grabbing my uniform, yanking a brush through my tangled hair. I was halfway to the door when I spotted it, a sleek envelope on the floor near the entrance. Someone had slipped it under my door during the night. No name, no address, just heavy cream-colored paper sealed with a wax stamp bearing an ornate C. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and pulled out a card written in elegant, masculine handwriting. Eleanor. I find myself in need of a private barista for an event this weekend. Your employer has agreed to lend your services for the evening. A car will collect you on Saturday at 7 p.m. Formal attire required, E. Corelli. There was no request, no question mark. Just a statement, an expectation of compliance. I sank onto my worn couch, the card clutched in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. He'd spoken to Marco, arranged to borrow me like I was cafe equipment. The presumption should have angered me. And yet, beneath the indignation was a treacherous flutter of curiosity. What kind of event? Why me specifically? I was still sitting there, lost in thought, when my phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Sorry, couldn't say no to Corelli. He's paying triple your normal rate for Saturday. You okay with this? I stared at the message, reality sinking in. This wasn't a request I could politely decline. Men like Enzo Corelli weren't accustomed to hearing no. Besides, triple my normal rate would cover next month's rent. With trembling fingers, I typed back a single word, okay. Little did I know that by slipping that envelope under my door, Enzo Corelli had already begun to draw me into his dangerous world. That by accepting his non-invitation, I had taken the first step toward a destiny that would change everything I thought I knew about myself, about power, about the thin line between fear and desire. And I had no idea that the consequences of that simple okay would lead me down a path from which there would be no return. Saturday arrived too quickly, bringing with it a knot of anxiety that had settled permanently in my stomach. I stood in front of my closet, staring helplessly at its meager contents. Formal attire required, the note had said, as if I regularly attended galas and charity balls on my cafe server's salary. After an hour of deliberation, I settled on the only suitable option I owned, a simple black dress I'd worn to a college friend's wedding 2 years ago. It wasn't particularly fashionable, but it was elegant in its simplicity, falling just below my knees with a modest neckline. I paired it with the only heels I owned, black strappy sandals that pinched my toes but looked presentable. My grandmother's bracelet gleamed on my wrist, the silver crescent moon catching the light. I'd polished it carefully, wanting that small piece of familiarity with me tonight. At precisely 7 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Outside your building. I took one last look in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at me. I'd spent more time than usual on my appearance, pinning my usually unruly auburn hair into a neat updo, applying makeup with a careful hand. My green eyes looked larger, more luminous with the subtle eyeshadow I'd chosen. Why did I care so much how I looked? I was just serving coffee, after all. The lie tasted bitter even in my own thoughts. Downstairs, A sleek black car with tinted windows idled at the curb, looking entirely out of place in my working-class neighborhood. A driver in a black suit stepped out as I approached, opening the rear door without a word. I slid onto leather seats softer than anything I'd ever felt, the interior smelling of expensive cologne and new car. I'd expected, half feared, half hoped, that Enzo would be waiting inside. Instead, I found myself alone in the back seat as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. "Excuse me," I said, leaning forward slightly to address the driver. "Where exactly are we going?" His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, assessing me briefly. "Mr. Corelli's residence," I swallowed hard, sinking back into the seat. His residence. Not a restaurant or hotel ballroom, but his home. The implications of that sent a shiver down my spine that wasn't entirely unpleasant. The city lights blurred past the window as we drove, moving from my neighborhood of modest apartments and family-owned shops to progressively more affluent areas. Finally, we turned onto a private road that wound up a hillside overlooking the city. Wrought iron gates opened silently for our approach, revealing grounds that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. The house, mansion really, loomed ahead, a modernist structure of glass, stone, and steel that somehow managed to look both imposing and elegant. Lights illuminated terraced gardens and what appeared to be an infinity pool that merged with the city lights below. "We're here," the driver announced unnecessarily, pulling to a stop at the front entrance. Before I could reach for the door handle, it was being opened from outside. I stepped out, smoothing my dress nervously, feeling underdressed despite my best efforts. A man in a suit, different from my driver but with the same watchful eyes, gestured for me to follow him. "This way, Miss Bennett." I followed him into an entrance hall with soaring ceilings and minimalist decor, all clean lines and neutral tones punctuated by what I suspected were extremely valuable pieces of art. The space should have felt cold, but subtle lighting and the faint scent of wood smoke gave it an unexpected warmth. "Mr. Corelli will join you momentarily," my escort said, leaving me alone in a sitting room just off the main hall. "Please make yourself comfortable." Comfortable was the last thing I felt as I perched on the edge of a sleek white sofa, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Through large windows, I could see the city spread out below, a tapestry of lights twinkling in the darkness. From this vantage point, it looked like it could fit in the palm of your hand. Perhaps that's exactly how men like Enzo Corelli saw it, something small and manageable, subject to their will. The view never gets old. I startled at the voice, turning to find Enzo standing in the doorway. He'd been so silent in his approach that I hadn't heard him coming. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit with a crisp white shirt open at the collar. No tie, giving him an air of casual elegance that somehow made him even more intimidating. "It's beautiful," I managed, rising to my feet, suddenly very aware of my breathing, my posture, the way the dress hugged my waist. He moved into the room with that same controlled grace I'd noticed at the cafe, his eyes never leaving mine. "Thank you for coming, Eleanor," as if I'd had a choice, but I kept that thought to myself. "I'm still not entirely clear on what you need me to do this evening." "Straight to business," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "I appreciate that." He closed the distance between us, stopping close enough that I could detect the subtle notes of his cologne, something woodsy and expensive. This close, I could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the tiny flecks of amber in his dark eyes. "I'm hosting a small gathering tonight," he continued. "Business associates, the kind of men who appreciate the finer things. The coffee at these events is usually abysmal, and I recalled how perfectly you prepared mine at the cafe. It seemed absurd that someone like him would go to such lengths for coffee, but I nodded anyway. "How many guests?" 12, including myself. Nothing too elaborate, just espresso and perhaps some simple coffee cocktails for those who prefer them. Everything you need is already prepared in the kitchen." He gestured for me to follow him, leading me through the house to a kitchen that would have made professional chefs weep with envy, all gleaming stainless steel and marble, with an espresso machine that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. A woman was already there, arranging appetizers on silver trays. She glanced up as we entered, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Corelli, the first guests have arrived." "Thank you, Maria. This is Eleanor. She'll be handling the coffee service tonight." Maria nodded at me, her eyes assessing. I've set everything up as requested. The Sicilian blend is in the labeled container. Enzo turned to me. Maria will show you anything else you need. I should greet my guests. He paused, his gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary. That dress suits you. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me with a flush creeping up my neck and Maria's curious eyes on me. So you're the cafe girl, she said, her tone giving nothing away. I suppose I am. She nodded, as if confirming something to herself. Mr. Corelli is very particular about his coffee. He must have been impressed. There was something in the way she emphasized impressed that made me wonder if we were still talking about coffee. Before I could dwell on it, she was guiding me through the workings of the espresso machine, showing me where everything was kept. The guests will be in the main living room and on the terrace. They'll come to you when they want coffee. Mr. Corelli doesn't like servers hovering. That, at least, was a relief. I wasn't sure I could handle walking among Enzo's business associates with a tray of cups, afraid of spilling on suits that probably cost more than my yearly salary. As the evening progressed, I settled into a rhythm, preparing espressos and the occasional Americano for men who barely looked at me as they placed their orders. They spoke in low voices about things I pretended not to hear, property acquisitions that sounded suspiciously forced, shipments coming in next week, a judge who had seen reason in a recent case. From my station in the kitchen, I had a partial view of the main living room through an open doorway. Enzo moved among his guests with easy authority, speaking little but commanding attention whenever he did. Several times, I caught him glancing in my direction, his expression unreadable. It was nearing midnight when the last guest finally departed. I had just finished cleaning the espresso machine when Enzo appeared in the kitchen doorway, loosening his collar with one hand, holding a tumbler of amber liquid in the other. "You can leave the rest," he said, nodding toward the few cups I was washing. "The staff will handle it tomorrow." I dried my hands on a towel, suddenly awkward. "I should be going then. If you could call your driver, have a drink with me first." Again, not a question. He was already pouring a second glass from a crystal decanter. "Unless you're in a hurry to get back." To my empty apartment, to my lonely bed, to another day of serving strangers who didn't see me? "No hurry," I admitted, accepting the glass he offered. "Come," he said, leading me back through the house to a different room. A study lined with bookshelves, dominated by a large desk and a pair of leather armchairs near a fireplace where embers still glowed softly. He gestured for me to take one of the chairs, settling into the other with casual grace. "You did well tonight. Not everyone can handle that crowd without becoming uncomfortable." I took a sip of my drink, whiskey, smooth and expensive, warming me from the inside. They weren't exactly subtle about their business dealings. A slight smile touched his lips. "And yet you didn't flinch, didn't ask questions, didn't look judgmental. It's not my place to judge, isn't it?" He studied me over the rim of his glass. "Everyone judges, Eleanor. Most are just too cowardly to admit it." I met his gaze directly. "Fine," I judged, "but I've worked customer service long enough to know that the richest clients are often the ones with the dirtiest money." I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth. Speaking so boldly to a man like him. What was I thinking? But instead of anger, I saw a flash of something like respect in his eyes. "Honesty," he said softly. "Refreshing." He rose from his chair, moving to stand by the fireplace, looking down at the dying embers. The firelight cast half his face in shadow, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the intensity of his profile. "Do you know why I noticed you that first day in the cafe?" The question caught me off guard. "Because I wasn't Sophia?" He turned to face me, something dark and unreadable in his expression. "Because you were the only person in that room who wasn't pretending, the students pretending to study, the businessmen pretending to be important, the other servers pretending to care." He took a step closer. "But you moved through it all with this transparency. No mask. Just exhaustion and determination and quiet dignity." I swallowed hard, unsettled by how accurately he'd read me, by the intensity with which he'd apparently observed me. "Why did you really bring me here tonight?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He considered me for a long moment, then set his glass down on a side table. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. And for the first time, I sensed genuine uncertainty in him. Perhaps I wanted something real in a room full of liars. He reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against my grandmother's bracelet. "This means a lot to you," I nodded, my skin tingling where he'd touched. "She raised me after my parents died. Car accident when I was 8. The bracelet was the last thing she gave me before cancer took her 3 years ago. And now you're alone." It wasn't a question. "I manage." "Yes," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "I believe you do." Something shifted in the air between us. A tension that hadn't been there before, or perhaps had been there all along, unacknowledged. I rose from my chair, suddenly needing distance, movement. "It's late. I should go." He nodded, stepping back, that mask of control slipping back into place. "Of course. My driver will take you home." As we walked to the entrance hall, I felt his presence behind me, close, but never touching. At the door, I turned to face him one last time. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said formally, falling back on politeness to mask the confusion of emotions swirling inside me. He reached past me to open the door, his arm brushing mine, sending a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cool night air. "This doesn't have to be a one-time arrangement, Eleanor. I could use someone with your skills on a more regular basis." There it was again, that double meaning, that tension humming between us like a live wire. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked, finding courage I didn't know I had. His eyes darkened. "A job, for now, as my personal barista, 3 days a week, triple what you make at the cafe. And I'd still work at the cafe the other days?" "If you wish. Or you could work exclusively for me. The choice is yours." No, it wasn't. Not really. Because refusing meant never seeing him again. Never experiencing this strange, dangerous electricity that seemed to charge the air whenever he was near. And despite all my instincts screaming caution, I knew I wanted more of it, of him. "I'll need to think about it," I said, buying time, pretending I still had some control over what was happening. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face, made him look younger. Almost boyish if not for the knowing look in his eyes. "Of course. Take all the time you need." We both knew what my answer would be. The driver was already waiting by the car. As I moved to step past Enzo, he caught my wrist gently, his thumb pressing lightly against my pulse point. "One thing you should understand, Eleanor," he said, his voice low, intimate. "I don't form attachments. If you accept my offer, don't expect more than what I'm explicitly offering." I looked up at him, at the warning in his eyes, the carefully constructed walls. "Don't expect love from me," was what he was really saying. "I understand," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He released my wrist, and I walked to the waiting car without looking back, feeling the weight of his gaze on me until the car pulled away into the darkness. As the city lights blurred past the window, I touched my wrist where his fingers had been, my pulse still racing beneath the skin. I didn't expect love from Enzo Corelli. But whatever this was, this dangerous attraction, this game of power and surrender, I was already in too deep to walk away, and somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that I never really had a choice at all. I accepted his offer 3 days later. The decision came after a sleepless night of staring at my ceiling, weighing practicality against instinct. Triple my current salary meant financial security I'd never known. It meant not having to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. It meant perhaps a small savings account for the first time in my adult life. At least, that's what I told myself as I composed the text message accepting his terms. I refused to acknowledge the other reasons. The way my heart raced when I thought of him. The electric current that seemed to run between us. The dark curiosity about his world that I couldn't quite suppress. Within minutes of sending my acceptance, I received a reply with an address and a time for the following day. No pleasantries, no expression of satisfaction at my decision. Just facts, coordinates, expectations. Typical Enzo. The address led me to a high-rise in the financial district, all glass and steel reflecting the afternoon sun. The security guard in the lobby checked my ID against a list, then directed me to the private elevator that would take me to the penthouse. "Mr. Corelli is expecting you," he said, sliding a key card into the elevator panel. The doors closed silently, and I felt the slight pressure of ascent as the elevator rose swiftly toward the top floor. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that couldn't have been more different from Enzo's hillside mansion. Where that had been warm wood and natural stone, this was sleek minimalism: white walls, polished concrete floors, furniture that looked more sculptural than functional. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city and harbor beyond. "You're punctual. I appreciate that." Enzo's voice came from behind me. I turned to find him watching me from the doorway of what appeared to be a home office, his expression unreadable as always. He wore dark trousers and a light blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with dark hair. The casual attire did nothing to diminish his aura of authority. "I try not to waste other people's time," I replied, suddenly conscious of my simple outfit, dark jeans and a forest green sweater that brought out my eyes. He'd given no dress code for today, and I'd opted for comfortable practicality. He nodded approvingly, a valuable quality. His eyes lingered on me for a moment before he gestured toward an open-concept kitchen area. "I've had everything set up according to your preferences." I followed him, surprised by the statement. "My preferences?" I asked Marco what equipment you favor at the cafe. He indicated a professional-grade espresso machine, different from the one at his mansion but equally impressive. "I believe this model should be to your liking." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught me off guard. It was one thing to hire me for my skills. It was another to consider what tools would make me most comfortable in performing them. "Thank you," I said, running my fingers lightly over the machine. "It's perfect." Something like satisfaction flickered across his face. "Good. This will be your primary workspace when you're here. I typically require coffee in the mornings and occasionally when I have meetings here rather than at the office." He proceeded to give me a brief tour of the penthouse, indicating which areas were open to me: kitchen, main living area, guest bathroom, terrace, and which were private: master bedroom, his office when the door was closed. The rules were clear, the boundaries established. I was an employee, not a guest. "Any questions?" he asked when we returned to the kitchen. "Dozens, actually, but none I dared to voice." "Who are you, really? What exactly do you do that requires so much security? Why me, of all people?" Instead, I asked, "When would you like your first coffee?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Now would be good." Double espresso, with a splash of almond milk, Sicilian blend, sparkling water on the side, I finished for him. I remember. Something shifted in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or surprise that I'd committed his preference to memory. As I began preparing his coffee, I felt him watching me, assessing my movements. The weight of his gaze should have made me nervous, should have made my hands shake. Instead, I found myself relaxing into the familiar routine, my body remembering the rhythms of grinding beans, tamping the grounds, monitoring the extraction. I felt a curious sense of power in those moments. This might be his domain, but this particular skill was mine. Here, at least, I knew exactly what I was doing. I placed the finished drink before him, along with the sparkling water. He took a sip, his expression revealing nothing. "Perfect," he said simply. It shouldn't have mattered so much, that single word of praise. It shouldn't have sent warmth blooming through my chest. But it did. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. 3 days a week, I would arrive at the penthouse at 9 a.m. Sometimes Enzo would be there, sometimes he wouldn't, having left instructions with his security team. On the days he was present, he would often work at the dining table rather than his office, close enough that we existed in the same space, but far enough that conversation wasn't expected. Occasionally, he would ask me a question, simple things at first, about the weather, or a headline in the morning news. Gradually, the questions became more personal. Where had I gone to school? What had I studied? English literature, a degree that had proven uselessly expensive. Did I have family in the city? No. No one since my grandmother died. In turn, I learned little fragments about him, pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite fit together. He'd been born in Sicily, but brought to America as a child. He spoke 5 languages fluently. He preferred silence to music while working. He never ate breakfast, but never skipped lunch. He read voraciously, history, philosophy, classic literature, his bookshelves filled with well-worn volumes rather than decorative collections. What I never learned was anything concrete about his business. There were phone calls, always in Italian when they seemed important, always taken in his office with the door firmly closed. There were visitors occasionally, serious men with watchful eyes who regarded me with suspicion, until Enzo introduced me simply as Eleanor, my barista. And then there were the unexplained absences, days when he would disappear without warning, returning sometimes with a faint bruise on his knuckles, or a new tension around his eyes that gradually eased as I placed his coffee before him. I didn't ask. It wasn't my place to ask. I was the barista, nothing more. At least that's what I told myself on the nights I lay awake, remembering the brief moments when our fingers brushed as I handed him his cup, or the rare occasions when something I said made him laugh, a deep, rich sound that transformed his face and then disappeared as quickly as it had come, as if he'd momentarily forgotten to maintain his guard. One morning, about a month after I'd begun working for him, I arrived to find the penthouse empty except for Maria, the housekeeper I'd met at his mansion. Mr. Corelli had an early meeting, she explained, watching me set up the espresso machine for the day. He said to tell you he'll return by noon and would like lunch prepared. My surprise must have shown on my face. He didn't mention I'd be cooking, I said, frowning. Maria's expression softened slightly. Don't worry. Everything is already prepared in the refrigerator. You'll just need to heat it and plate it. I'd do it myself, but I have to be at the main house for a delivery. After she left, I checked the refrigerator. True to her word, a container of what appeared to be homemade pasta with a separate container of sauce waited on the shelf. Simple enough. I spent the morning cleaning the already immaculate kitchen, then browsing the bookshelves in the living room. Enzo's collection was eclectic. Classics in multiple languages, historical biographies, philosophical treatises, and surprisingly, a shelf of poetry ranging from ancient to modern. I was so engrossed in a volume of Neruda's love poems that I didn't hear Enzo return. I only realized he was there when I felt that familiar, prickling awareness, looking up to find him watching me from the doorway, his expression unreadable as always. You have good taste, he said, nodding toward the book in my hands. Neruda understood desire better than most. I felt heat rise to my cheeks as I returned the book to its shelf. I was just browsing while waiting for you to return. Maria said you wanted lunch prepared. He followed me to the kitchen, removing his suit jacket and draping it over a chair. Yes. I have another meeting this afternoon. I prefer not to go to restaurants when business needs to be discussed. I nodded, turning my attention to heating the pasta and sauce. As I worked, I felt him watching me, closer than usual. When I glanced up, I found him leaning against the counter just a few feet away, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened. You seem comfortable here, he observed. I shrugged, focusing on plating the pasta. I suppose I am. The routine is nice. And your other job? At the cafe? I still work there 2 days a week, mostly because it kept me tethered to normal life, to a world where men didn't have security teams and mysterious businesses and penthouse apartments. Marco's been understanding about the reduced hours. I imagine he would be, Enzo said, a dry edge to his voice that made me look up. Given the circumstances. Something in his tone made me pause. What circumstances? Enzo studied me for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. Marco Delgado has been paying protection money to the Ricci family for years. When he realized you were working for me, I suspect he became very motivated to accommodate your schedule. The casual way he delivered this information, as if it were perfectly normal, sent a chill down my spine, not because of what he was implying about Marco, though that was disturbing enough, but because of what it confirmed about Enzo himself. The Ricci family, I repeated slowly. Your competitors? A subtle tension crept into his posture. In a manner of speaking, I set the plate down on the counter harder than I intended. So you're confirming that you're what, exactly? A mafia boss? His expression hardened. I prefer businessman with diverse interests. Is that what they call extortion these days? I regretted the words immediately. A dangerous stillness came over him, his eyes darkening. For the first time, I felt genuinely afraid in his presence. Be careful, Eleanor, he said, his voice soft but edged with steel. There are questions you don't want answers to. I should have backed down. should have apologized, served his lunch, retreated to my safe role as the silent barista. Instead, something inside me rebelled against the facade we'd been maintaining. "Actually, I do want answers," I said, surprised by my own boldness. "If I'm working for a criminal, I think I have a right to know." In a movement so swift I barely saw it, he closed the distance between us, his hand coming up to cup my jaw. It wasn't painful, but it was firm, forcing me to meet his eyes. "What you have," he said, his voice low and controlled, "is a very well-paying job that requires discretion and coffee-making skills. Nothing more." I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt that now familiar current between us intensify, the danger and attraction twisting together until I couldn't separate them. "If that were true," I whispered, "you wouldn't have brought me into your home. Twice." His thumb brushed across my lower lip, so lightly it might have been accidental. "Perhaps I made a mistake. Did you?" We stood frozen in that moment, tension crackling between us. His gaze dropped to my lips, and I thought, hoped, feared, he might kiss me. Instead, he released me and stepped back, that impenetrable mask slipping back into place. "Enjoy your afternoon off, Eleanor," he said, his tone dismissive. "I'll see you tomorrow." It was a clear dismissal. I gathered my things, trying to ignore the trembling in my hands, the flush I could feel spreading across my skin. At the elevator, I hesitated, looking back at him. He stood by the windows, a silhouette against the city skyline, power and isolation radiating from his stance. "For what it's worth," I said, "I still don't judge you." He turned, surprise briefly visible in his expression before he controlled it. "Perhaps you should." The elevator doors closed between us, and I leaned against the wall, my heart pounding. I had just challenged a man who had people taken care of, who inspired fear in everyone around him. A man who had warned me not to expect love from him. A man I was falling for anyway. Against all reason. Against all self-preservation. The next morning, I debated not going back. I could text him, resign, find another cafe job, go back to my safe, predictable life of paycheck-to-paycheck anonymity. Instead, I found myself in the private elevator again, rising toward the penthouse, toward him. When the doors opened, the space was quiet, seemingly empty. "Enzo?" I called, moving cautiously into the main living area. No answer. Relief and disappointment warred within me. I headed toward the kitchen, ready to start my usual routine, when I noticed a manila envelope on the counter, with my name written on it in Enzo's bold handwriting. Inside was a smaller, sealed envelope, and a brief note. "Eleanor, I've been called away on urgent business. I'll be unreachable for several days. In my absence, I ask that you deliver the enclosed envelope to the address listed below. Today, 2 p.m., come alone." Below was an address in a part of town I didn't know well. I turned the sealed envelope over in my hands. It was unmarked, except for a wax seal with that same ornate C I'd seen on the first message Enzo had ever sent me. This wasn't part of my job. Making coffee was my job. This was something else entirely, something that crossed the already blurry line between employee and accomplice. I should throw it away, call in sick, pretend I never saw it. Instead, at 1:45 that afternoon, I found myself in a taxi heading toward the address Enzo had provided. The neighborhood grew progressively less polished as we drove, eventually stopping before a nondescript building with a restaurant on the ground floor. "Bella Notte," the faded sign proclaimed in curling script. "You sure this is the place, miss?" the driver asked, eyeing the shabby exterior doubtfully. I checked the address again. "Yes, this is it." I paid the fare and stepped out onto the sidewalk, clutching the envelope in my bag. The restaurant's windows were dark despite the open sign on the door. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, greeted by the scent of garlic and tomato sauce and the soft strains of Italian music. A heavy-set man with a gray mustache looked up from behind the counter, his eyes narrowing as he assessed me. "We're closed for a private event," he said gruffly. I straightened my shoulders. "I have a delivery for the owner, from Enzo Corelli." At Enzo's name, the man's demeanor changed instantly. "Ah, yes. We've been expecting you," This way, please. He led me through the dining room to a door at the back, knocking once before opening it. Inside was a small office where an elderly man sat behind a desk cluttered with papers and ledgers. Despite his age, he had the alert eyes of someone much younger, sharp and assessing as they fixed on me. "So you're Corelli's girl," he said, his accent much thicker than Enzo's carefully modulated tones. "I'm his barista," I corrected, unsure why the distinction seemed important. A knowing smile creased his weathered face. "Of course. The envelope?" I reached into my bag and handed it over, watching as he broke the seal and examined the contents. A letter and what appeared to be a set of documents. As he read, his expression shifted from curiosity to something like respect. "Tell Enzo that old Giuseppe agrees to his terms," he said finally, folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket. "And that he has unexpected taste in messengers." I nodded, eager to leave, but as I turned to go, the old man spoke again. "Girl," he called, making me pause at the door. "Be careful with Corelli. He is not a man who gives his heart easily. Or at all." I thought of Enzo's warning, "Don't expect love from me." "I know exactly who he is," I replied, more confidently than I felt. The old man's smile deepened, revealing a gold tooth. "No, you don't. But perhaps you will." 3 days passed with no word from Enzo. I went to the penthouse each morning as scheduled, but the space remained empty, untouched. By the 3rd day, I was beginning to worry, not just about my job security, but about him. Where had this urgent business taken him? Was he safe? The questions circled in my mind, unanswerable. I was just about to leave on the 3rd afternoon when my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Roof. Now." My heart lurched. I knew instinctively it was from Enzo, though how he'd gotten my personal number I had no idea. With trembling fingers, I pressed the button for the top floor in the elevator, then climbed the short staircase that led to the roof access door. The city stretched out before me, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. And there, at the edge of the roof garden, stood Enzo. He had his back to me, hands in his pockets as he gazed out at the skyline. Even from behind, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his spine. "Enzo?" I called softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, and I stifled a gasp. A dark bruise bloomed across his left cheekbone, and a small cut split his lower lip. He'd tried to mask it with his usual impeccable grooming, but the evidence of violence was unmistakable. "What happened?" I asked, stepping closer, fighting the urge to reach out and touch his injured face. "Business disagreement," he said dismissively. His eyes searched mine. "Did you deliver the envelope?" I nodded. "Old Giuseppe said to tell you he agrees to your terms, and that you have unexpected taste in messengers." Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Giuseppe has always been perceptive." He gestured to a small table, set with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. "Join me?" I hesitated only briefly before taking the seat opposite him. He poured the wine, a deep red that caught the fading sunlight like liquid garnets. "You took a risk, sending me to Giuseppe," I said, accepting the glass he offered. "Yes." He didn't elaborate, didn't apologize. "Why me? Why not one of your men?" He took a sip of his wine, considering me over the rim of his glass. "Giuseppe wouldn't have trusted them. The old families respect tradition, ceremony. A personal envoy carries more weight than a hired soldier. And that's what I am? Your personal envoy?" His gaze intensified. "Among other things." The air between us charged with that now familiar electricity. I looked away first, taking a too large sip of wine to steady myself. "I thought you might not come back," I admitted, "after our conversation. Because you called me a criminal to my face." A hint of that rare smile touched his lips, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. "Few people have the courage to speak to me that way, Eleanor. Is that why I'm still employed? Because I amuse you?" His expression sobered. "No. You're still employed because you're excellent at your job. Because you're discreet. Because you delivered that envelope without question, even knowing what I am." "And what are you exactly?" He set his glass down carefully. "I think you've already decided what I am." I had. And yet the label, Mafia boss, criminal, gangster, seemed inadequate somehow. Too simple for the complex man before me, with his perfect espressos and poetry collection and eyes that held shadows I couldn't begin to understand. "The Corelli family," I said slowly. "You inherited the business from your father?" "My uncle," he corrected. "My father died when I was 12. My uncle raised me, taught me everything he knew. When he died 5 years ago, I took his place." "Did you want to? Take his place?" Something dark passed over his face. "Want has nothing to do with it. It was my responsibility, my duty to the family. And if you could choose differently, would you?" He didn't answer immediately, his gaze drifting back to the city spread below us. "There was a time," he finally said, "when I thought I might become a professor of literature. I was 19. In my second year of university, I had a professor who believed I had potential." The revelation stunned me, this glimpse of a different Enzo, a path not taken. What happened? "My cousin Matteo was killed, a hit by the Ricci family." His voice was matter-of-fact, but I saw his hand tighten around his glass. "I left university the next day. Some choices aren't really choices at all." The weight of his words settled between us. For the first time, I saw Enzo not just as the powerful, intimidating figure I'd built him up to be, but as someone shaped by circumstances beyond his control, just as I had been by the death of my parents, by my grandmother's illness, by the financial realities that had narrowed my own options. "I'm sorry," I said softly. He looked at me sharply. "Don't pity me, Eleanor. I've made my peace with who I am." "Have you? Really?" The question hung in the air between us, unanswered. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Enzo refilled our glasses, his movements precise, controlled. "Tell me about Giuseppe," I said, changing the subject. "Who is he to you?" A ghost of a smile touched Enzo's lips. "He was my uncle's consigliere, his advisor. He retired years ago, but he still holds influence with the old families. His blessing carries weight." "His blessing for what?" Enzo's eyes met mine, intense and searching. "For change. The old ways are dying, Eleanor. The protection rackets, the violence, the vendettas. They're unsustainable in today's world. I've been working to legitimize our business interests, to create something that can survive into the next generation, and the Ricci family doesn't agree with this vision." His expression darkened. "Antonio Ricci is old school. He sees my efforts as weakness, as betrayal of tradition." He touched his bruised cheek absently. He made his opinion quite clear during our recent discussion. I fought the urge to reach across the table, to touch the injury with gentle fingers. "Is that why you sent the envelope to Giuseppe? To rally support against Ricci?" Enzo studied me with new appreciation. "You're very perceptive. I read a lot of mystery novels," I said, attempting lightness. That earned me a rare, genuine laugh that transformed his face, softening the hard lines, revealing dimples I'd never noticed before. The sound did something to my insides, a warm flutter that had nothing to do with the wine. "There's more to you than meets the eye, Eleanor Bennett," he said, his voice warm with something that might have been affection. "I could say the same about you." Our eyes locked across the table, and for a moment, I thought he might reach for me, might bridge the gap that separated us. Instead, he rose from his chair, walking to the edge of the roof to look out at the city now twinkling with lights in the gathering dusk. I followed, standing beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body but not quite touching. "Why did you really hire me, Enzo?" I asked softly. "The truth." He was silent for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost intimate. "From the moment I saw you in that cafe, I knew you were different. There was something about you, a strength, a clarity I rarely see." He turned to face me, his eyes intense in the fading light. "You looked at me without fear, without artifice. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world?" My breath caught in my throat. "Is that why you keep me at a distance? Because I don't fear you?" "I keep you at a distance because I should." His hand came up, fingers hovering just shy of touching my cheek. "Because men like me don't get to have normal connections. Because everything I touch becomes complicated, dangerous. Maybe I don't want normal, I whispered, heart racing. Maybe I decided that the day I accepted your job offer, something shifted in his expression, the careful control slipping, revealing a hunger that mirrored my own. Slowly, deliberately, he closed the remaining distance between us, his hand finally making contact with my cheek, warm and slightly rough against my skin. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his face inches from mine. "Tell me this isn't what you want." Instead of answering, I rose on tiptoes and pressed my lips to his. For a heartbeat, he remained still, and I feared I'd misread everything. Then his arms wrapped around me, pulling me against his chest as he deepened the kiss. It was nothing like I'd imagined, and I had imagined it. On lonely nights in my apartment, it wasn't gentle or hesitant. It was consuming, demanding, a clash of desire too long denied. His hands tangled in my hair, angling my head to give him better access. I clutched at his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath expensive fabric, the barely contained power. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against mine. "This complicates everything," he said, his voice rough. "I know." His thumb traced my lower lip, red and swollen from his kiss. "I told you not to expect love from me." "I remember. I can't give you what normal men can give: safety, stability, a future without shadows." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not asking for any of that." He studied me, as if trying to read the truth in my eyes. Whatever he saw there made him pull me closer, his arms encircling me as he buried his face in my hair. "You deserve better than me," he whispered, almost to himself. "Let me decide what I deserve." We stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, the city lights twinkling below us like fallen stars. I felt the steady beat of his heart against my cheek, the rise and fall of his chest. For the first time since I'd met him, he seemed truly at peace. It couldn't last, of course. Nothing perfect ever does. The harsh ring of his phone shattered the moment. Enzo stiffened, reluctantly releasing me to retrieve the phone from his pocket. His expression hardened as he glanced at the screen. "I have to take this," he said, already moving away, already transforming back into the controlled, distant man I'd first met. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold without his warmth. I watched as he spoke rapidly in Italian, his voice low and tense, his free hand clenched at his side. When he ended the call, he stood with his back to me for several heartbeats, shoulders rigid. When he finally turned, his face was a mask once more. "I have to go," he said. "All business now. A situation requires my attention." "Enzo." He cut me off with a raised hand. "This evening was a mistake, Eleanor. One that can't be repeated." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You don't mean that." "I do." His eyes wouldn't meet mine. I allowed myself a moment of weakness. "It won't happen again." "So, that's it? One kiss and you're running scared?" His expression darkened. "I'm not running. I'm protecting you." "From what?" "From me. From my life." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration that betrayed his composure. "Do you have any idea what would happen if Antonio Ricci discovered I had feelings for you? You would become a target, a way to get to me. I can handle myself." "No," he said sharply. "You can't. Not against men like Ricci." He moved closer, gripping my arms. "The things I've seen, Eleanor, the things I've done. You have no concept of what this world is really like." "Then show me," I challenged. "Stop shutting me out." For a moment, I thought I'd gotten through to him. Something in his eyes softened, wavered. Then his phone buzzed again, and the moment was lost. "Go home, Eleanor," he said, his voice flat. "Take a few days off. I'll call you when I need coffee again." And just like that, I was back to being the barista, nothing more. I waited until he'd disappeared through the roof access door before allowing the tears to come. They fell silently, carried away by the evening breeze as the city lights blurred below me. I didn't hear from Enzo for a week. No texts, no calls, nothing. I alternated between anger and heartache, between replaying our kiss and cursing his stubbornness. I went back to working full shifts at the cafe, ignoring Marco's curious glances, deflecting his questions about why I was suddenly available again. On the 8th day of silence, I returned to my apartment after a particularly grueling shift to find a thick envelope slipped under my door. No name, no address, just that familiar wax seal with the ornate C. Inside was a first-class plane ticket to Sicily, departure scheduled for the following evening, along with a brief note in Enzo's bold handwriting. My grandmother's villa in Taormina. The car will collect you at 6 p.m. 1 week. No strings, no expectations. Just come. My hands trembled as I read the note a second time, then a third. What was he playing at? After pushing me away, after that cold dismissal on the rooftop, now he wanted me to fly across the world to meet him. I should refuse. Should tear up the ticket, send a clear message that I wasn't a toy to be picked up and discarded at his whim. Instead, I found myself packing a bag, heart racing with equal parts anticipation and uncertainty. The car arrived precisely at 6 the next evening. The driver was unfamiliar, but he had the same watchful eyes as all of Enzo's men. He loaded my single suitcase into the trunk without comment. At the airport, I was whisked through a private security checkpoint and onto a luxury private jet, not a commercial flight, despite what the ticket had indicated. Enzo's influence, I assumed, arranging for privacy even in this. The flight was a blur of nerves and exhaustion. I'd barely slept the night before, tossing and turning, second-guessing my decision to come. By the time the plane touched down in Sicily, the golden Mediterranean sun was just rising over the horizon, painting the landscape in warm amber tones. Another car was waiting, this one a sleek black Mercedes with tinted windows. We drove along winding coastal roads, mountains on one side, the sparkling sea on the other. Finally, the car turned onto a private drive lined with cypress trees, pulling up before a villa that seemed to grow organically from the hillside. It was nothing like Enzo's modernist homes in the city. This was old-world elegance, honey-colored stone, climbing roses, terracotta tiles, the kind of place that had witnessed generations of laughter and tears, of births and deaths, of whispered secrets and passionate declarations. The front door opened as I approached, revealing not Enzo, but an older woman with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp eyes that assessed me in a single glance. "Miss Bennett," she said in accented English, "welcome to Villa Corelli. I am Sophia, the housekeeper." I followed her into a cool, tiled entryway, fragrant with fresh flowers. "Is Enzo here?" "Mr. Corelli asked that you make yourself comfortable. He will join you this evening." She gestured to a sweeping staircase. "I will show you to your room. You must be tired after your journey." My room was a spacious chamber with floor-to-ceiling windows that opened onto a private terrace overlooking the sea. The bed was draped with linens so fine they felt like water against my skin. A vase of fresh wildflowers sat on the bedside table, filling the room with their delicate scent. After I'd showered and changed, Sophia brought me breakfast on the terrace. Fresh fruit, pastries still warm from the oven, coffee that rivaled anything I could make. As I ate, I gazed out at the view, the brilliant blue of the Mediterranean merging with the sky at the horizon, the distant outline of what Sophia told me was Mount Etna, rising majestically in the distance. The day passed in a strange, dreamlike state. I explored the villa's gardens, napped in the shade of an ancient olive tree, read a book from the well-stocked library. All the while, anticipation built within me, a humming tension that grew stronger as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. I was standing on my terrace, watching the sunset paint the sea in shades of gold and crimson, when I felt it. That prickling awareness that had become so familiar. I turned slowly. Enzo stood in the doorway of my room, framed by the dying light. He wore linen trousers and a white shirt open at the collar, more casual than I'd ever seen him. The bruise on his cheek had faded to a yellowish shadow. He looked tired, but utterly, breathtakingly handsome. "You came," he said simply. "Did you think I wouldn't?" I wasn't sure. I turned back to the view, my hands gripping the stone balustrade. "I almost didn't, after the way you dismissed me on the roof." I heard him move closer, felt the heat of him behind me, not quite touching. I'm not good at this, Eleanor. At what? Letting someone in. Admitting vulnerability. His voice was low, almost pained. My whole life, I've been taught that attachment is weakness, that emotional connections are liabilities. I turned to face him, finding him closer than I'd expected. Then why am I here? He reached out, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face with unexpected gentleness. Because I can't stay away from you. God knows I've tried. The admission hung between us, raw and honest in a way I'd never heard from him before. What changed? I asked. I did. His hand cupped my cheek, his thumb tracing my lower lip. Or rather, you changed me, made me question everything I thought I knew about myself, about what I want. And what do you want, Enzo? His eyes darkened, intense and focused solely on me. You. Just you, Eleanor. This time when he kissed me, it wasn't the desperate, consuming passion of our first kiss. It was slower, deeper, a wordless promise. His hands framed my face as if I were something precious, something to be cherished rather than possessed. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. I brought you here because this is the only place I've ever truly been myself. Not the businessman, not the heir to the Corelli name, just Enzo. And who is he? Just Enzo? A smile touched his lips, gentle and genuine. I'm still figuring that out, but I'd like to discover it with you. As the last light faded from the sky, as the first stars began to appear above the Mediterranean, he led me inside. That night, in a room filled with moonlight and the scent of jasmine drifting through open windows, Enzo Corelli showed me exactly who he was beneath the masks and armor he wore for the rest of the world. And I discovered that the man who had once warned me not to expect love from him had already given me his heart, even if he hadn't yet found the words to say it. In the soft light of dawn, as we lay tangled in sheets still warm from our passion, he traced the curve of my shoulder with gentle fingers, his expression more open than I'd ever seen it. Stay with me, he whispered. Not just this week, not just as my barista. Stay with me, Eleanor. I thought of the life I'd left behind. The tiny apartment, the endless shifts at the cafe, the loneliness that had been my constant companion since my grandmother died. And I thought of the life he was offering, complex, perhaps dangerous, but also filled with passion, with purpose, with him. On one condition, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. Name it. No more shutting me out, no more pushing me away when things get difficult. He considered this, his expression serious. My world is dangerous, Eleanor. There may be times when distance is the only way to protect you. I don't need protection, I countered. I need honesty, partnership. I need to know that when you say stay with me, you mean as your equal, not as someone you keep in a gilded cage. He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still tracing patterns on my skin. Finally he nodded, a decision made. Equal partners, he agreed, his voice solemn as a vow. No more secrets between us. As the Mediterranean sun rose higher, bathing the room in golden light, I knew that the man who had once warned me not to expect love was offering it now, in his own way. And I, who had spent so long feeling invisible, unseen, was finally being truly seen, not just by him, but by myself. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many in Enzo Corelli's complicated world, we would face them together, not as mafia boss and barista, but as man and woman, equal in love, if not in power. Yes, I whispered against his lips. I'll stay with you. And with those words, the final walls between us crumbled, leaving only truth, only us, only the promise of a future neither of us could have imagined that first day in the cafe when a simple coffee order changed everything. Thank you all so much for following this story. If you're enjoying it, don't forget to like and subscribe because your support is important for me to continue here.